Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about how you can actually discern the difference between a spiritual experience and something generated within the mind, such as psychosis. Now, this is going to involve some pretty heavy topics, so just bear with me. We will get through it, and yeah, keep an open mind as we go. So for those of you who are new, I am a psychology student. I have my bachelor's degree and I'm currently studying postgraduate. So my aim in life is to eventually become a psychologist. And that means that I'm going to have to figure out what constitutes mental health conditions and what does not. And in the mixture of that are things which could be considered spiritual experiences. Now, contrary to some myths on the internet that atheists like to promote, there's no preclusion in psychology for spiritual experience. And most of the research on religion and spirituality shows that it's beneficial to human beings psychologically. I myself have had a number of different spiritual experiences, and my experiences have led me to believe that Christianity is true. And so that's what I generally talk about on my channel, is Christianity and psychology. So if that interests you, then feel free to stick around and check out some other videos. However, I have also seen firsthand a number of people experiencing psychosis and delusions and things of that nature, and often with like religious overtones to the delusions or to the hallucinations. So people who are clinically diagnosed with schizophrenia who are also Christian, I have met during my life, and it's a very tricky line to tread for both the people who are experiencing that and also the people who are fellowshipping with those people, because it can be really hard to know what to do in those circumstances, how to respond to some of the more bizarre things that they might talk about. It's not good to discount spiritual experiences as a possibility, and it's also not good to affirm delusions. So a very tricky path to tread. Now, where should we even start? Well, the first thing I would start with is defining what exactly is psychosis, because that is often what is more commonly mistaken for spiritual experiences, or what people might think spiritual experiences are actually going to end up being. Like, there's this fear that some people have when they have spiritual experiences that perhaps they are losing their marbles. And so if we know what psychosis is and how it presents and all of the symptoms that are associated with it, then you can figure out whether or not what you are experiencing fits into that category. Psychosis is defined as a deviation or complete break with reality, depending on its severity. Psychosis can be a feature of mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, or it can be a disorder on its own. It can also be drug-induced. Psychosis is characterized by positive and negative symptoms, which is not a judgment on whether something is good or bad. Positive means it's added to the person's behavior or subjective experience, whereas negative symptoms are an absence or removal of something that would normally be present. Positive symptoms are hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking or talking. Negative symptoms are isolation or social withdrawal, which can happen because the person is increasingly paranoid and fearful of others, and also sometimes flat affect, which is a lack of emotional expression. If you notice any of these symptoms in other people or perhaps in yourself, then it is very important to seek medical attention. So the main two symptoms of psychosis that we would associate with pseudo-spiritual experiences like false spiritual experiences, would be hallucinations and delusions. Hallucinations can be visual, auditory, tactile, taste, or smell. It's essentially false sensory experiences which others cannot detect in the environment. The person is experiencing something which does not seem to be present in the environment or being produced by external stimuli. One example is when meth users feel bugs crawling under their skin, so they start picking sores in their own flesh to try and dig them out. Or the classic auditory hallucinations associated with schizophrenia, where voices talk incessantly and say horrible things to the person or coax them towards violence. So those are hallucinations, and we will return to the subject of hallucinations very shortly because they are probably the thing that is most associated with spiritual experience or supernatural experiences. The other one is delusions. So what are delusions? Well, contrary to some of the trolls on the internet, a religious belief is not a delusion. Psychology defines delusions as either bizarre or non-bizarre beliefs that are persistent regardless of evidence to the contrary. Delusions are not conventionally held beliefs of religious or cultural groups. Those beliefs are not considered delusional by psychology. The term bizarre usually refers to delusions that are not possible within accepted frameworks of reality. For example, someone believing they can fly if they jump off a cliff without any gear to assist them. The average person would know that someone who believes this is going to die if they actually attempt it. A non-bizarre belief or delusion is if something is technically possible, even though it is not likely. For example, 25-year-old Nathan Gale was a fan of the heavy metal band Pantera. In 2004, he murdered the guitarist Dimebag Darrell live on stage during a show by shooting him in the head. Gale was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and part of his condition was a deluded belief that all of Pantera's music had been written by himself, and the band was stealing it, despite the fact that the band had been releasing albums since Gale was a toddler. Gale's delusions could be considered non-bizarre, while still being unlikely or even impossible in nature when all of the evidence is taken into account. Evidence does not matter to a deluded person, and quite frankly, if you try to present evidence or use logic with a deluded person, the end result is usually that they become either enraged or they start to treat you like perhaps you're an enemy and they socially withdraw from you. The delusions are not something that they have reached a conclusion about because they used rational thinking to get there. So when it comes to delusions, sometimes the best approach to dealing with someone who has them is not to like flat out contradict everything about it and just say, no, you're wrong, that's stupid, why would you even think that? Because that's antagonistic and they're not going to respond very well. I mean, no one's going to respond very well despite whether it's delusional or not. But by the same token, you don't want to affirm any delusions because they will take it as a green light that that is 100% true, and no one is ever going to be able to convince them to let go of these fantasies that they have in their head. So the only thing you can really do with a delusional person is to actually question them. Question how they got to that conclusion. Like if someone says to you, oh, I'm the Queen of England, then you could say, oh, really? I thought that King Charles was on the throne of England. How did you become Queen of England? When did that happen? When was your coronation? When you start probing someone who has delusions, then usually they struggle to actually answer the most basic questions of like, when did this happen? Who did you succeed from? And all this sort of thing. Because they haven't really thought about that. It's not fully formed in their mind. If it is, that's very concerning. If their beliefs are something that you know for a fact cannot possibly be true, but they've got this whole backstory associated with it, then yeah, that's a bad sign. If you have a quick look on the internet, you'll find a mixed bag of people warning others about the dangers of experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs and New Age spiritual practices, and others who are pushing those very things as a gateway for spiritual awakening through psychosis. There's plenty of content produced by people who are suffering from mental illnesses, trying to persuade an audience that what they are experiencing is not a medical issue, but a spiritual awakening. For example, a YouTuber who calls himself Prophet Dr. Octavius Moore makes videos telling people not to take their meds because it's from Satan and any medical condition can be treated with an exorcism. Effectively, he is trying to influence people to ignore serious medical issues and instead succumb to hallucinations or delusions which rob them of their quality of life. Octavius himself has talked about multiple stays in psychiatric hospitals, but doesn't seem to think that he needs treatment.
In this study, a word popped up that shocked me when I saw the definition. Pharmakia, meaning pharmacy. The definition is the use or the administering of drugs, poisoning, sorcery, magical arts, often found in connection with idolatry, and fostered by it. The deceptions and seductions of idolatry. I want to go back. Since they want to talk about Rockefeller and they want to talk about all this other stuff, and some parents call themselves Christians and would rather take their children to psychological sorcerers instead of putting them on the altar where the elders can lay hands on them and declare that they're going to be healed by the power of God and cast that devil up out of them. I have spoken to many people, especially when I have been admitted to hospitals and the doctors could not understand why everybody loves me. Nobody's tripping out. Nobody's talking to themselves. People are not angry and fighting. Even their counselors were crying. I was counseling them and prophesying to them and telling them things that I shouldn't have known because I don't know them people. You ain't got to believe me. I can give you the names of the hospitals I've been to, and everybody loves me. It's only in the world where I have problems where people are not aware of the things of God, where you begin to give them something new, and when they receive it, they start seeing the manifestation of divine glory.
Unfortunately, this is a very common feature of psychosis, especially when someone is suffering from paranoia, because they believe that anyone who is in sort of an established system is dangerous or conspiring against them. They might have persecutory delusions, they might have delusions of grandeur, like calling themselves a prophet and a doctor, even though his actual background when he talks about it is having been in and out of psychiatric facilities and also correctional facilities. So I think it's very unlikely that he has managed to get his doctorate in that time. Psychosis is also not like something to be taken lightly. It's a very serious condition. It actually, the reason why it is considered an illness is because it impairs people's functionality. They are unable to function as they normally would. So they're unable to maintain jobs, relationships, personal hygiene, maintain cleanliness in their house, look after pets, that sort of thing. It's not some kind of harmless phase that someone is going through on their quest for spiritual awakening. Psychosis is actually a very serious medical condition that needs treatment from professionals. But Octavius is not alone. I have seen other videos from other YouTube creators where there was one guy that was talking about how Jesus must have been suffering from psychosis, and so, you know, someone who suffers from psychosis today is actually just a prophet, and they're just someone who should be venerated and given the position of shaman or something in the community and granted multiple wives instead of being told to take medication. So unfortunately, that is a lot of the content that you're going to find if you search for this particular subject on YouTube. I was trying to find, anyone who was like moderately respectable in this field to talk about it. And I found one, and I'll talk about him soon, but that's part of the reason why I make a lot of my content, is because I go looking for things and I'm like, this does not exist. Why is no one talking about this? And then I just do all the research, and then I'm like, well, here you go. Okay, let's get back on track. When someone is experiencing delusions, those delusions can come in a variety of different forms. So they could be grandiose delusions, they could be persecutory delusions. There are jealous delusions, where someone is convinced that, like, whoever they're with at the time is constantly cheating on them despite any evidence to the contrary. So it doesn't even matter how many relationships they have, every single person they date is a cheater, even though there's absolutely no evidence to back it up. And then there's also paranoid delusions. I think most delusions fit into the category of paranoid, whether they are persecutory or jealous or grandiose. Grandiose less so. Delusions with a religious flavor to them are often really tricky to kind of disprove, because it's immaterial stuff, so you can't necessarily point to evidence to contradict it. Sometimes you can. I mean, when I talk about Christianity and I talk about things like prophecy, there's standards in the Bible for what constitutes real prophecy and delusions. So when the Bible talks about it, it says if someone makes a prophecy and they're speaking on behalf of God, they're presuming to speak on behalf of the creator of the universe, then that prophecy needs to come true. If that prophecy does not come true, then that person is a false prophet, and that person in biblical times would have to be... If you're here looking at this video to try and figure out whether your spiritual experiences are part of psychosis or delusions or something along those lines, then that's actually a good sign. It's a good sign that it might not be, because most people who are suffering from psychosis, who are having hallucinations and who are having delusions, are utterly convinced.
In other words, you will never be able to convince a delusional person that their beliefs are untrue, no matter how contrary to reality those beliefs are. If you're considering multiple possibilities to explain your experience, it means you're using rational thinking. And studies have shown that people with serious delusions do not tend to use the rational part of their brain very much at all. In fact, they're prone to jumping to conclusions instead.
So how would a professional differentiate between a spiritual experience and something like psychosis? Someone whose work I have found incredibly helpful is Dr. Grant Mullen. Now, he is a Christian and a psychologist, and most of his practice he has treated other Christians. He wrote a book called Emotionally Free, based on a lot of his own sort of case studies and theories that he developed over the years as a practicing psychologist. He divided the issues that he treated into 3 clusters. So he divided them into a medical condition, so like a biological medical condition. For example, the theory of what causes psychosis is an overload of dopamine in the brain. That's how various different drugs can induce psychosis, because they overload the brain with dopamine and it seems to produce these effects. But someone with schizophrenia might simply have an imbalance in their own physical makeup, so they're essentially getting high off their own supply. So that is a medical issue, that's a physical medical problem that has a mental manifestation. The second category is emotional problems, or perhaps personality problems. Someone who has a personality disorder is not demon possessed. They've just learned over the years, usually during childhood, that certain behaviors get the results that they're looking for, even if that means having very toxic fallout for everyone around them. They kind of shut down their empathy in many regards as a means of getting to different goals. For someone with something like anxiety, that could be a mental and emotional problem. So, for example, I had anxiety really, really high when I was living in an abusive situation. So, depending on your circumstances, the problem could be that you're being abused. It's not that you as an individual have a mental disorder or that you have some kind of spiritual attack on your life. It's just there's a jerk in your home and it's horrible to live with them. And of course, the third category he had was spiritual. And so if he could rule out the other two sources of distress that people were experiencing, then the third possibility was investigated. But it's very important to diagnose the source of the distress in someone's life before you attempt to treat it. The wrong treatment for something could, first of all, it won't work, but second of all, it could actually make things significantly worse. If someone who is experiencing psychosis is treated as though they have a demon, then they're going to incorporate that into their delusions, and they're potentially going to suffer even longer because of it. So there's a number of things that you do need to rule out before settling on the idea that something is spiritual in nature. First of all, ruling out psychosis. Second of all, ruling out someone messing with you, or perhaps things just being a natural phenomenon in the environment and you misinterpreting what that is because you don't have a frame of reference for what you're hearing or what you're seeing. If those factors can be excluded, then you can entertain the possibility of it being spiritual. With a lot of my spiritual experiences, I looked for more corroborating evidence before I was prepared to say that this was supernatural in nature. So other people having similar experiences, perhaps in the same place or with the same things. I'll explain in a minute. I'll tell you what my story is. Or as I mentioned before, like prophecy, for example, if it comes true, then chances are what you were hearing was legit. Okay, so to give you an example, I'm going to use my own personal experience of having bought a haunted house. So this was a number of years ago when I lived in Queensland, and the house itself was extremely ordinary. It was a 1980s brick and tile build. If you can hear little footsteps, that is a dog. No lickies, puppy. Yeah, so the house was very ordinary, not at all what you would expect a haunted house to look like. And yeah, it was in suburban Brisbane. As far as I know, the house did not have any kind of strange history. There were no bad deaths or anything that I could find. But in the first year of living there, I had a few housemates to help with the mortgage. And so, the house seemed good. It was bright and neutral and airy and all of that stuff. Nicely renovated, seemed pretty modern. On one side of the house there was a single car garage that had been converted into an extra room. And in that area was basically where we decided to put all of our computers and office equipment. So that was kind of known as like the office. And One day I was in the office because I worked later in the day, so I didn't start work until about lunchtime. It was mid-morning, bright, sunny day, and I was working at my computer in the office, and all of a sudden I heard someone sigh right next to my left ear. And I freaked out. I was like, I jumped out of my chair. I ran all around the house. I'm like, who is in my house? Someone is in my house. Who the F is in my house? I was absolutely freaking out, and I went outside. I tried to find someone in the yard. There was no one in the vicinity. There was no one else at home. All of my housemates were at work, and no one had snuck into my house. No one was in the yard. I mean, we had dogs, so the dogs would have alerted the household if something was going on. So that was pretty disturbing. That was very unsettling. But I still didn't really feel like there was anything necessarily wrong with the house. And when I say someone sighed, I mean it was like, like it was very audible, it was very clear, it was quite close. It seemed like right next to my ear. And I was not asleep. I was not taking any medications or anything like that. It was a very ordinary day, and I cannot think of any circumstances that would have produced a spontaneous hallucination. Anyway, about a week later, at probably around 3 a.m., the TV in the living room turned on at full blast on static and woke up the entire household, and everyone went into the lounge room to try and turn it off. Now, this TV was renowned for being absolutely terrible with the remote. Like, you basically had to walk right up to the corner of the TV, point the remote at the corner and press the buttons before it would respond in any way, shape or form. So even though I had a cat, and it's entirely possible that the cat stepped on the remote, it's very unlikely that it would have had any effect on the TV. And how did it get to a static channel at full volume? Like, that would have taken time. It would have taken a number of buttons being pressed at the same time. And there was no sign of the cat. I don't know where she was at that point. So we turned the TV off by going up to the corner and pressing the button, and kind of all looked at each other and just went to bed because that was a bit weird. The next day, we're in the kitchen, everyone's making breakfast and stuff, and we start talking about it. It's like, oh, that's really weird. That TV doesn't usually respond very well to the remote. Did the cat step on it, etc., etc. And then I was like, I've had some weird experiences here. And my housemate, the only other female in the house, she was like, I was in the office the other week and I heard someone sigh. And I was like, no. So when I say you're looking for some kind of corroboration with another person independent of your experience, I'm talking about stuff like that. So this was literally someone who on a separate day, on a separate occasion, had the same experience in the same place. And we didn't influence each other because we didn't talk about it until there was something else that came up that was weird that everyone experienced. Anyway, as you can imagine, my housemates decided to move out. And so the only people who were living in the house after that were myself and my then partner. So he often started work very early in the morning and did not finish until quite late in the evening. He was a bit of a workaholic. But that meant that essentially I was the last person to leave for work and I was the first person to get home from work. And unless he made a special trip to the house, then he was like the only other person who had a key to the house. Now, it is entirely possible that he went out of his way to mess with me. I don't know why he would do that. He certainly never gave any indication that he was doing anything like that. And there was no one else who had access to our house. So these next things that used to happen were a bit strange. During winter, whenever I got home from work, it was usually dark. So before I would leave in the morning, I would switch on the lounge room light and I would also switch on the porch light so that it looked like there was someone at home, but also so that I could actually see to get my keys out and open the door. And there were a few occasions, like just sort of random times, when I got home and the porch light was switched off, but the lounge room light was still on, and the light switch for the porch was inside the house. So it wasn't like outside the house where anyone could mess with it. And I checked the light bulb. There was nothing wrong with the light bulb. It hadn't blown, it hadn't gotten loose. If I switched on the light, it worked. It was actually switched off. So I started to wonder, did I forget to switch it on? Did I think that I switched it on, but it didn't quite actually catch? When you flip a switch and sometimes it doesn't go all the way, but it feels like you switched it on. So I was like, well, maybe that's what happened. And so after it had done that a few times, I started paying attention. So for a while, I was paying attention and nothing was unusual. I would go to work, come home, both lights would be on, all good. But there was one day I came home and I knew for a fact that I had switched on both of the lights because I switched on one, I switched on the other, and I was like, right, you're on, light is on, yes, go to work. And I came home, it switched off. That was disconcerting because I know that it's not me forgetting to turn it on. It's not me thinking that I might have turned it on but not actually done it. I had been keeping track of my own behavior. It was either another person messing with me or something else. So I kept turning on both of the lights, paying attention to it, making sure that they were actually on before I left, that the doors were all locked, no one could get in, and then going to work. And after a little while, it happened again. So at this point, I'm standing outside of my house with no porch light on, and I just start crying and I don't want to go into my own home. Either someone is messing with me or something else is messing with me. And considering some of the activity that had happened before that, which had been experienced by other people in the house, I was extremely uncomfortable. Another thing that was going on at that particular time was I would be watching TV in the lounge room alone because I spent most of my time in that house alone. And every single evening, out of the corner of my eye, there was like an arched doorway from the lounge room into the kitchen dining area. And just on the other side of the archway was the doorway into the converted garage. And as I'm watching TV, I can see out of the corner of my eye a big black hooded shadow figure standing in that doorway. But of course, every time I turn and look, it's not there. So I started to wonder, is there something wrong with my vision? Is there some medical condition with my eyesight? Am I experiencing some form of blindness? Now, you have to keep in mind this was almost 10 years ago. and nothing has been wrong with my vision ever since. But I kept seeing this shadow figure, and the porch light kept turning off. And then one morning I am half asleep because my alarm went off and I didn't want to get up. So I hit snooze, and then I rolled over and was kind of dozing, trying to get back to sleep. And I heard someone shout my name. They didn't just shout my name, they shouted my name in the voice of a family member who did not live with me. So as you can imagine, I shot up out of bed. I was wide awake at that point and looked all around my house. Sure enough, no random family members had turned up. No one else was at home. My ex had already gone to work, and there was just no rational explanation. There is some theory as to why people have experiences in that in-between state of sleep and consciousness, and so you could chalk that particular experience up to that brain state, but it doesn't really explain the rest. So taken as like a number of different things as a whole, it sort of adds up to something very strange and disconcerting. Was this a paranormal experience? Well, I believe it was, because I managed to get rid of it. And how I got rid of it was I just absolutely bombarded my house with praise and worship music. So I found this album that I had bought years ago as a teenager because I really liked Celtic music. And it happened to be actually a Christian album, which I didn't really realize at the time. I just thought it was nice. And I played Christian music essentially over and over in my house, filled all the space with like these beautiful songs, and I always made sure that my house was spotlessly clean. I refused to be intimidated by this thing. I refused to give in to fear, and I refused to be driven out of my own home. So in a way, I guess I claimed back the space, and I also asked God in a way for help. Although at the time I didn't really know that I was asking God for help. It was happy music, and the advice that I had found on the internet was to use happy music. This just happened to be Christian worship music, and I think that's why it actually helped. And the reason why I think it actually helped is because of later spiritual experiences that I had, where I essentially had visitations from the Holy Spirit. And that can also be one of those gray areas, like, was I hallucinating? Well, if I was hallucinating, then somehow those hallucinations led to my life becoming more productive and more stable and more positive in a way. So I did incredibly well at university. I finished with a distinction average and a grade point average of 6 out of 7. I have maintained my jobs, 2 jobs, for years now. I have maintained a relationship and gotten married, and things are going well. There's no conflict. So, like, do you have hallucinations and then your life improves? Or is there a spiritual aspect to reality? The opposite can also be true. There can be spiritual visitations and spiritual activity which leads to essentially the destruction and dismantling of someone's life. So that cannot be discounted either. If someone's experiences do not fit into the category of psychosis and they're not explained by other natural phenomenon, then just because they have negative fruit essentially doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it might be from a bad source. Jesus said in the Bible that by their fruits you know them. So if something has a negative outcome, then that means that it's probably from a bad source, and if it has a positive outcome, then it's probably from a good source. Of course, even the bad sources can have some perks for at least a while. It's really up to the individual to figure out if these spiritual experiences are actually good for them, or if it's sort of a net negative in their life. If things are just not panning out the way that they should, if their life isn't on track, they don't have control of their finances, they don't have good relationships, they have a lot of instability with work and housing and things like that, then there might be some need to change the spiritual experience and to look for something which is healthier. Because the last thing that you want is to essentially bring about psychosis from spiritual experiences, because that also happens to people. As I mentioned before, there were multiple videos that I found on YouTube about people warning about the spiritual dangers out there and how they can lead to psychosis. And there has been studies on this. And unfortunately, some people have experienced spontaneous psychosis at things like meditation retreats. It's important for spirituality to help you to connect with reality as it is, as your life actually is, not to constantly avoid reality in some way, shape, or form. My spirituality these days, when it comes to Christianity, it helps me to navigate reality, to stay on track with my studies, to keep on top of my work, to maintain my life and to be healthy in it. It's not a form of escapism. It's not a form of spiritual bypassing, which unfortunately some spiritual practices are. They encourage people to disconnect from reality. And if you disconnect from reality too much, then you can be susceptible to things like psychosis. So hopefully that was informative and helpful for you, to give you some kind of direction and pointers and barometer for measuring these things, and hopefully to give you a bit of peace of mind. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Take care out there. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I will see you next time. Bye.